a price taker, which means that the demand curve that we face in the foreign market is horizontal, right? No matter how much we export to this foreign market, it is not going to change the price that we can charge. So let's think about this as the demand curve foreign, which equals the marginal revenue in the foreign market. Okay, so here's where it sometimes gets a little tricky. Notice we have two demand curves. We have two marginal revenue curves. We've only got one marginal cost curve. We know that profit maximization is where we set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Well, the marginal cost side is easy to see. We have two marginal revenue curves. Uh-oh. What does that mean? Well, we'll end up with two different quantities, yeah. However, we need to think about what we set up, right? The firm is already operating in its domestic market. It now begins to export to the world market or the foreign market. The foreign market is where it's earning marginal revenue. That becomes the marginal revenue for the firm, what its exports are. So the marginal revenue that's relevant for the firm in its decision to enter the export market is this marginal revenue. So that says this is the amount, let's call this A now. This is the quantity that we should produce in order to maximize our profits. Remember, profit maximization is all about marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So if this now becomes our incremental market, it's also our incremental or marginal revenue. So the revenue from the foreign market is what we want to set equal to our marginal cost curve. Now, how much do we produce, or how much of this production do we sell domestically versus how much do we export? I mean, that's the other big decision that the firm faces. I'm sorry? Do we still produce a QM domestically? I don't know. What do you think? Well, it's got to be one of three answers, right? Yes, we're at QM. No, we produce less. No, we produce more. So we vote? Yes. Oh, were you voting? Or which way were you voting? Less or more? More domestically? More domestically? Less domestically? Okay, at least we have a market, right? So how would this monopolist decide? I thought we decided that a profit maximizing firm will sell where marginal revenue equals marginal cost.
So when the marginal revenue is higher in the home country,
uh-huh.
Well,
I could sell way back here domestically, right? I mean, give me just sell one unit. That'd give me my highest marginal revenue. You mean here? What do you think? Yes?
Wouldn't you just sell QI at the price of demand or and QM at that price?
Well, that's the question we're asking. So this is a total amount that we produce, right? So what we have to decide is how much of this total production we export and how much we sell in the domestic market.
But isn't that just external competitive that's including domestic?
All this? So we're exporting that amount?
But QI includes
Total production.
including domestic.
Domestic and, yeah, this is domestic and exports. This is total production. Why is this hard? What is the profit maximizing behavior of any business? Marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? What is the marginal revenue that this firm is now earning? Here? Right? Okay, so this now is our marginal revenue. We want to set marginal revenue equals to marginal cost in both markets. Okay? So if this is our marginal revenue, what's our marginal cost? Well, it's right here, point A, right? So if we're producing this amount, this is what our marginal cost is. Notice that once we determine our output, we've also determined our marginal cost. You hit the nail on the head, right? Once we decide to produce this amount, point A becomes our marginal cost for all of our production. How much we want to sell domestically depends upon the domestic marginal revenue curve and our marginal cost, which turns out to be right here. So this tells us if we're producing Q1, then that determines our marginal cost, setting that equal to our domestic marginal revenue, says we should produce, of our total production, this amount should be domestic sales. And this will be the price PD, will be the price that we'll sell it at. So notice that in this particular case, domestic consumers really get hosed. You remember that technical term from micro, hosed? Right. They get less quantity, and they have to pay a higher price for it. Woohoo! Consumers are happy. But look what happens. This is the foreign price. We are selling in the foreign market at a lower price than we're selling in the domestic market. That's what we call dumping, selling in two different markets. In some sense, you could argue, if you were a foreign competitor against this monopolist, that this monopolist was using its monopoly profits in its home market to subsidize the lower price. However, notice that this actually is the profit maximizing condition for this firm operating in these two markets. So this is economically logical for the firm to do. This is, in fact, what we would expect a firm to do when it's faced with segmented markets where it is an imperfect competitor in one and a perfect competitor in the other market. So this distance, now becomes our exports. So notice, total production goes up. Exports obviously go from 0 to some positive number. And domestic sales, not production, but domestic sales fall relative to their autarky level. Yes?
So in this case, is the buying of export, is the monopoly giving up the monopoly revenue or the monopoly profits?
So we would have to know more. You know, the domestic monopoly profits smaller or larger? We'd have to know something about the price elasticities. Not necessarily. Might actually make more profits depending upon how inelastic the demand curve is.
So why would the foreign import, why would foreign producer complain if these monopolies, like the home of monopolies, only a price paper in their country because they are basically also selling at the same price and they are basically having one more small firm when these firms go to their country?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, I mean, one could argue that if the foreign market actually is a perfectly competitive market, that the foreign competitors shouldn't care. They can sell as much or as little as they want at the market price, right? But what do we know in a perfectly competitive market? If you expand the number of firms, where all the firms already in the market increase their production, they, as individual firms, cannot influence the market price, but they can influence the industry supply curve, which can change the price. And you're right, if it's a perfectly competitive market, it probably would not get complaints from foreign competitors, but it might not be perfectly competitive. So this, by the way, works. I mean, this analysis, yes, I'm sorry, before I go on.
Yeah, for that firm, if you look at the old profit area,
Uh-huh.
maybe that's just keep going, but the old profit area for just the domestic market, where it does get profit, seems much larger than the new profit area for the domestic market. And for the foreign market, the profit is zero, right? It doesn't sell for as much revenue, as much cost. So for the
Well, remember, profits are not the difference between price and marginal cost. It's between price and average cost. We don't have an average cost curve here. So, and as I mentioned earlier, whether the monopoly profits are bigger or smaller depends upon how steep or flat the demand curve is. So how price elastic or inelastic demand is. The more inelastic it is, the greater the probability the profits have actually risen. Right? Because if the demand curve is very inelastic, then higher prices don't reduce quantity very much. You have a very steep demand curve. So if your price goes up, quantity doesn't go down very much. And especially if you have economies of scale, you might actually end up with greater profits. Okay. So the point I wanted to make with this example is essentially that it's rational economic behavior, profit maximizing behavior, setting marginal revenue to marginal cost to be selling at different prices in different markets. Now notice it doesn't work if the markets aren't segmented. If you have arbitrage opportunities between the markets, then that can compete away those price differentials. But that doesn't often happen. And in fact, we will see these kinds of price differentials from rational profit maximizing behavior whenever sales are more price responsive in one market than they are in the other. So we just set it up so that it's perfect competition, but it need not be a perfectly competitive market. You could have downward sloping demand curves in both. But if the price elasticities of demand are different, then you will still end up maximizing profits, but doing so at different prices in the two markets. Yes, could. Yeah. Again, it'll depend upon. So notice this is a general statement. We charge different prices if we have different price elasticities. So if you had what if you were a perfectly competitive firm in your domestic market and a monopolist or quasi-monopolist in the foreign market? Then you could charge a higher price there. Well, I guess I'm done.